Hello, social workers, mental health professionals, and change agents. Welcome to another episode of season 4 of the Social Work Rants podcast. Saludos a todos. Greetings, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, tapping in, wherever and however you're watching it and listening to this podcast. You can follow the podcast on Instagram at the Social Work Rants podcast. That's all one word. Um, YouTube, hit the subscribe button, type in the Social Work Rants podcast, hit the subscribe button. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Social Work Rants and on Facebook. Hit the like button, type in the Social Work Rants podcast. Hit the like button. I really truly appreciate all the love, all the support. My guests at this time, I'm very excited. Uh, it's been a couple months in the works. We got it done. We first connected back in like the beginning of like the winter. It seems like late fall, beginning of the winter, um, in a downstate conference here in the state of Delaware, which I now reside. And great to connect, Dalisi Washington. How you doing, my friend?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm happy to join you.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time out to come on the podcast. As of this recording is on Saturday, Saturday morning in a freaking snowstorm slash blizzard, depending where you at.
Yeah. hmm
um, so yeah, let's get right into let everybody know who you are and what you do in our wonderful, exciting yet challenging field of social work.
Yeah. I love being a social worker. So I'm happy to connect to a podcast specific to that. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. My license is in Pennsylvania and Delaware. I've had the opportunity to serve um, across other states as well. I have a private practice that ironically during the pandemic became a group practice, and our primary service is immigration psychological evaluations. And I can go into that a little more. Prior to that, most of my experience was in health settings, um, and a lot of my work has been with the Hispanic community, so Latinx. I identify as Afro Latina. My parents are from the Dominican Republic. I was born and raised in New Jersey. Then I went to Temple University, um, got my psychology degree there, then Westchester University for my master's in social work, and kind of stayed in this area, Pennsylvania, Delaware. So most of my profession has been here, and with the immigration evaluations. Since the pandemic, we've gone completely telehealth, which hasn't been an issue. Um, and I feel fortunate that I'm offering a service that many, we don't even know about it. Most that you speak to that do this work, they'll say it fell into their lap. They didn't find out until they were working in the field and someone told them about it. In my case, I had one client, he asked for a letter confirming our services. His legal immigration attorney then communicated like, hey, he needs a full evaluation that talks about the hardship to his children, and um, kind of did that. The attorney told me what the report should include, and after that he basically said this is something that many immigrants need, and they don't always know who to go to. They need someone who can really cover um, a full history of their life. When we think of a biopsychosocial assessment, um, but then that can also write it up. So a good writer, someone who can serve them in their language, but that can also write well, to be able to write this long report that's then used as evidence for their immigration case. I'm not sure how you want me to break that down, Bass,
Yeah,
because
I know for like I never heard the the terminology of immigration evaluation. No, what is that? You mentioned kind of similar to biopsychosocial. Is that something similar? Like, what exactly is an immigration evaluation?
yeah, so it's an evaluation, a psychological evaluation. that's used as evidence to support, um, I'm going to say, an immigrant family that's in immigration proceedings or seeking legal status or adjusting their status in the US. And I'll give you some examples. The reason I'm saying immigrant families is because sometimes the focus of our evaluation is with the person, with the immigrant that doesn't have papers in the US. Sometimes it's with the family member that actually has status or US citizenship or legal permanent residence. So, to give you an example, one of the most common that we receive the referral is for individuals that are petitioning for a spouse that's undocumented. So let's say I'm married to a Dominican man. I have US status. He's been here for some time because of our marriage or because we're legally married. Um, I would be evaluated as the one with status to basically talk about what the hardship would be to me if my husband has to return to his home country.
Mm.
And there's more to that. It's not necessarily even deported, but when that paperwork is submitted, you're waiving the penalty or the punishment that he would have to remain in the Dominican Republic for a 10-year span. So the report covers what it would mean for me. And if I have children, what it would mean for myself as a wife and a mom, if I have to uproot my family and we all have to go to the Dominican Republic, or if I'm staying in the US without my husband and potentially raising my children as a single mom. So we
Right.
discuss all scenarios. What does it mean if, for whatever reason, I have to send the kids with my husband because I can't support them on my own here? And so we cover, when I say the full life history, past, present, anticipated future, it's really going into any trauma history, any medical needs, emotional needs. What are the financial implications? What are the educational or academic, whether it's concerns or even if it's about my own? I'm in nursing school trying to do this for my family, but if my husband is forced to leave, then will I be able to finish that degree? So we really, it's an opportunity to talk about it in any way, but there are these different categories
Right.
that are considered hardship factors that the immigration office takes into account when they're making a decision as to what should happen for this family. So that was one. The
Right.
other ones are asylum. Immigrants that are seeking asylum here, that evaluation is essentially used to cover what are the reasons that they fled their country, what are the reasons that they would fear returning, and what protections or stability they need um, in the US. There's also undocumented immigrants that might be victimized or victims of crime in the US. If they are able to, there's so much is involved, but essentially, if they've reported that crime and if they're cooperating with police, there's a protection to them that in the US, they suffered this victimization. And so the report is used as evidence of what that impact has been. And then it gives them an opportunity. It opens a door to a pathway to citizenship. There's also VAWA, which is Violence Against Women Act. I'm not sure if that name has been changed, but it's for any male, female, um, anyone that has suffered domestic violence, married to a US citizen. Um, Again, that report is based on what trauma they face, what types of abuse. They call it like extreme cruelty factors. And so it goes through everything and anything that falls under that category of intimate partner violence. So as you can already tell, it is very trauma heavy, this work.
Yes.
uh, I mean, we all have some level of difficulties or difficult life moments. But the truth is, the majority of our cases, we are talking about significant trauma. There's some recurring themes, like if you think about acculturation stress, minority stress, if you think about the sacrifices that are made or family separation, So there's some things that tend to come up quite a bit.
Right, of course. Those are the things that are usually like talked about. Being a culturization, coming in and
Mhm,
adjusting to American culture, and the kids get adjusted quickly, and they're more quote unquote more Americanized, and then like having parents and grandparents, still with their culture, and there's like a
mhm,
culture clash, and parents are like the kids are not listening, they're just more Americanized, and not listen, and all that comes with it. But you really dive in
mhm.
into the nitty gritty of this work. How long you been doing that?
So to be honest, I started doing it almost immediately after graduating with my
Mm,
master's. And so I did it on the side for a long time. And I think that's what's unique about my practice, that it is literally our primary focus. The majority of our cases, we carry a very small treatment caseload, whereas most people, they are providing these immigration evaluations as either a side hustle or on top of whatever treatment cases they have. So when I was working full time at a clinic, at the hospital, even when I was doing contracted work, this was always just something I did, every now and then. It was one attorney that would refer Saturday mornings. I would, because I was working, 9 to 5 during the week. So I would set up these appointments, and I do a one time 2 to 3 hour session where I am building rapport immediately, gathering all the information I need to then prepare this report they need. So usually it's a one time um, deal. Every now and then I have to go back, gather a little more information, but for the most part, that's how it works. We are not committing as treatment providers. Obviously, we do offer referrals. Um, and just to go back uh, to the types of cases, I think the only one I'm missing is human trafficking cases,
mm,
whether it's sex trafficking, labor trafficking. Um, those are also other cases that can use these evaluations as evidence as they're trying to seek um, legal status. Uh, if I remember any other, oh, I know, if there's an order of deportation.
mm.
So, similar to the first type I talked about, where we're talking about the hardship to the family members, um, if there is an actual order of deportation where they're in front of an immigration judge, that is honestly making determination whether they will be formally deported, no longer able to re-enter this country, then they have an opportunity to fight that case by presenting what harm it would be to their spouse or their children. Um, it's it's more involved than what I'm telling you,
Right.
because there's a lot of intricate eligibility and like guidelines of whether someone can or cannot apply for these types of things and whether or not they need an evaluation. So it's not that every immigration case needs an evaluation, but the ones I mentioned are the most common where that is needed. And more, it's like, don't submit without it. It holds a lot of weight. And that's what I was told when I started doing the work. And I honestly didn't realize until I sat in an immigration court, because we can serve as expert witness. And so I presented in person and I realized how the entire conversation, the defense, I don't even know if I'm using the right terms legally, but essentially the brief that the attorney prepared is based on that evaluation.
Right.
The judge is questioning and going through all these details
Mhm.
that's then in that report that was provided.
Right.
Everything else is just the added documentation. So the amount of time and years that immigrants spend trying to fight for their case is, I mean, you have some people that it's 5 years, others where it's over 10 years, maybe even over
Yeah.
20 years. And it's a lot of back and forth. And that in itself is traumatic. It's
Yeah,
this like
absolutely.
toxic stress. And that's what we see with the adolescents and these mixed status families. Um, and I've seen that where you have children that present traumatized. And sometimes it's hard to pinpoint where is that coming from. And then you start to realize that it's really the uncertainty and the toxic stress that they've been living under, or the weight that they've been carrying on behalf of their parents, or even your childhood arrivals. You have a 6 year old that, came to the US at 6, gets into trouble at 14 years old, and then
Mm.
is facing deportation at
Right.
20. And he's like, what do you mean I'm going to have to go back to a country I don't even know? So there's just, and when I say trouble, I mean itty bitty, like any
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
mistake that any of us can make, um, and get into some like legal trouble, but the consequences for that person with status are like here, or way more than that.
Right, right.
So that's where we see just some of the injustices, um, and I take it to heart. Growing up to immigrant parents, I don't think I knew any of this. I wasn't asking these questions. How would I know? They weren't talking about it. And I can say there's some privilege in that my parents had legal status. They had, by the time I was born, they had been here over 20 years. So it wasn't as uh, raw, or the experience wasn't like what I see for the children and adolescents that I'm serving,
Right.
that constantly living under that fear. And with our last president, there was a spike for the adolescents I was serving, where that anti-immigrant rhetoric was deeply, deeply felt.
Mhm.
And there are no words to describe like the amount of fear, um, that the adolescents I was serving were going under. So I was getting more and more angry and fired up.
Yes.
And that's
Of
kind of,
course.
yeah, and that's kind of what resulted in doing more of this work and dedicating more of my attention. But it was really a spiritual decision. So I can't even tell you that it was that I had envisioned that I would be in private practice only providing or dedicating all
Right.
of my resources to that work. Um,
You hit you hit you hit three different things, definitely two different things extremely important. Where's your work based out of? And and can people, I guess kind of two-part question. Where are you currently doing this work at, and can people like outside, like within the US, or even your area you work at, could people refer clients to you?
so we accept referrals from anyone, every state. And when I say that is because for immigration purposes, immigration courts, not all cases present in immigration court, but even the immigration office, all that's required is that it's a licensed provider, a licensed mental health provider. And so I've been able to serve anyone in any state, or even if they happen to be in their home country and they need to be interviewed. So we accept referrals from any state. My office, until recently, was based out of Pennsylvania. Um, but if there's, right now, it's been telehealth. Honestly, because of the pandemic.
Right.
But I had families traveling like 2 hours because,
Mm.
again, the service is limited. It's not many of us doing this. Um, but now I'm saying if someone needs, sometimes because it's so trauma intensive, um, if they need an in-person visit, we can make accommodations. So Philadelphia area, Wilmington, Delaware area, that's where we're closest to in terms
Okay.
of if the accommodations need to be made. Um, and you said where I was based out of. So yeah, that,
Yeah.
accept any referrals. Usually it's prompted by the attorney, but I'll
Okay.
screen. I make sure that I'm not providing the service unless they know what they need it for. Some families try to be proactive, but again, usually I don't want to provide a service that they may not need. So I
Yeah.
wait until they know exactly where they are with their legal case so that the report isn't outdated, and so that they know that they actually qualify to submit their application.
Now you mentioned something about family not talking about it, like status, like you seeing the kids now, like they're really not of no fault of their own. They're in this situation because of parents and with their legal status, and you growing up to immigrant parents, and you didn't have to deal had to, at least your parents kind of, whatever the terminology is, like maybe not. sheltered you away from it, but you were able to live your life. Not like the kids now, like they're coming in and they're like not only having to be going to school and like learning English possibly for the first time, and then going back home and thinking about whether their parents or family is going to be deported or not, or having like immigration after them, things like that. Like so explain like how like you know you explain how you were, I guess, lucky and blessed and privileged to not having to go through that compared to the kids that you working with now that are having to deal with all that on top of just being a regular kid.
Yeah, yeah. So let's see. Um, so as I mentioned, I was born and raised in North Jersey. So that means very close to New York. So one protective factor that was already there, aside from the fact that I didn't have to deal with the fears of parents being deported, or even my own, like my entire life, like all I knew was where I was born and raised. Um, but another protective factor is that I grew up surrounded by um, many Hispanics and many family members, um, because I was so far out. Like, even though I'm a child to immigrants, um, I had the protective factors of they had been here quite a while. Family was already there. We lived in a community
Mm.
that where it felt like you had that camaraderie, that respect, that grounding, where many cultures were represented. So that's huge, right? So I didn't
Yeah,
necessarily
absolutely.
feel like an outcast. The community was already built up to support um, immigrants. So like I went to a church where it was all Spanish, and that helped me maintain my cultural roots, right?
Right.
So to think about all of that. Um, so my lived experience is very different than that of the clients I serve.
Mhm.
Um, and it's important to share that with them. Um, One, it's my way to build rapport. So I'm immediately communicating what my intention is, why I do this work. And then also making sure that they understand that they can tell me everything they've gone through, but really what is of most value and how I get to the heart of the matter is if they can communicate their thoughts, their feelings, and how it's affected them. You can have two people that have faced sexual trauma, or two adolescents that came in at 6 years old and are trying to figure out what they're going to do about their status. But they are then sharing like what that has meant to them and what their lived experience really looks like. So
Mm.
I remind them that, um, you know, I have the theory behind things, like I have my professional license, but really they are the ones that are communicating what this really means for them, what their hopes, desires, fears, worries, what all that is. So I say I'm capturing all of the strengths, but then in this report, we're kind of writing about what the worst case scenario is. That if
Mm.
something doesn't change, or if this family member doesn't get status, or if something like drastically changes in their life, how they will lose the support or the stability or the security that they might have. Um, but your question is so involved. So let me take it back to kids, right? We have children that are entering as unaccompanied minors. I don't always get a ton of those cases because they are handled a little differently.
Mhm.
I also don't always get my DACA, deferred action for childhood arrivals. I don't always get DACA recipients because, again, their case is just, it looks a little different. They may not necessarily need an evaluation. Um, Usually, I'm getting more, if I'm dealing with a childhood arrival, it might be someone that is facing an order of deportation and now they're trying to like fight their case, or they already have a family, um, and they're trying to prove that hardship. But what I saw, I'll go back again. Health settings. The work I did for a long time was integrated behavioral health. I offered counseling services within a small clinic. And because it was a clinic for individuals without insurance, we had a
Mhm.
lot of clients that were undocumented. So I would see adolescents and adults. And then I was at a children's hospital in Delaware, Nemours Children's Health. And in there, I was in one of their peds offices where obviously all of the referrals were from the pediatric office, and
Mhm.
we were offering a service, that warm handoff between the pediatrician, right? That's integrated care. Um, but because I'm bilingual, I told them protect my appointments for only my Spanish speaking families. So even if the child spoke English, um, obviously I need to be able to communicate with the parents who speak Spanish. So that's where I saw a lot of my adolescents. And then I offered behavioral therapy, parent child interaction therapy for young children from age 2 to 7. So I like to say that my preference is adolescents and adults, but the truth is that with a lot of my work, now I serve across the lifespan.
Right.
Um, and so I'm grateful for that. I feel honored, right? I just have a profound respect for the human experience. So it's like, give me everything, the ugly and the
Right.
beautiful. But with all that and hearing the stories, we have children and adolescents that might be within a family of mixed status. So they may have siblings that don't have status, they may have status, or it may be someone where they have status. Um, I think I meant to say they don't have status, but
Right.
then their younger siblings, let's say, or other family members do have status. Um, what I saw more of that made me angry is that there are like multiple court hearings when parents were fighting their order of deportation. And the court hearings would be like years apart, like they continue the case.
Uh,
So the children start to become aware um, and nervous and anxious and fearful, like,
mhm.
daddy has to go to this appointment, and they might tell him he has to leave, or but then it's like there's no resolution, and then it persists. And so you may have a child that's showing up and it seems like everything's fine, like they might be doing well academically. um, they may live within a supportive household, not always though.
Right.
All of this, right? And then they have this like burden or this cloud
Hmm.
that's just there where they don't know what's going to happen. And they go some months
Yeah.
where they're like, okay, but then it's, oh, the court hearing is coming up.
Right.
And so we have two things. We have parents that are very verbal, they're telling their kids what's happening. But then I've also had the cases where parents are like, we don't want to tell them, we don't think they can handle it. And what do you think happens? They do know. They're hearing it,
Get there.
overhearing it.
Yes.
Um, so I think one of the differences, um, and I'll say it, the one of the differences with the anti-immigrant rhetoric of 2016 or even before that
Even before
that
that.
came in was that everything was at the surface level. So I think it was heard more, the fear was there more. Children were then asking their parents more questions.
Mm.
So it was definitely a fear response at that point, that for some they had never dealt with. And then for others, it was just heightened because they didn't feel like they had the protection they did before.
Right.
Am I making sense?
No, no, absolutely. And you lead right into my other point that I wanted to touch on. Uh, like you said, all this anti-immigrant rhetoric has happened like way before 2016. We've been dealing with this with the country for seems like for forever, and not just with DACA recipients, but just immigration as a whole, and figure out what's the best way to handle the situation, and a situation that's not going away. For me personally, I am sick and tired of news only focusing on us Latino population as like immigrants, and always showing pictures of us. We're not the only population that's trying to immigrate into this country, but is we the only ones that they show on the news and on in magazines and newspapers. And it's like there's so many. people coming into this country on a daily basis, and like and they all and my thing like geography wise, how they seem to manage from wherever they come from and come try to still come from like Central South America going to Mexico, like yeah, coming from like other side of the country, like how it takes some strength and some courage and just to for you to even get to there to try to come up to the US. So that is me personally. I can't stand like only focusing on us Latino, Latinx, whatever you want to call yourself, and just showing yourself like the news, like showing just us. Like we're not the only ones immigrating into this country.
Yeah, yeah. There's so
That's
much
that piece.
that, yeah.
That's that piece. And then my other question was how how are you doing this work with uh has 45 being president, and even before him running for president, and like I said, this been going on years, like when Obama was president, even
Yeah.
way before Obama, like we've been dealing with this for such a long time. So even with just let's concentrate on like you doing the work while 45 running for president and his 4 years in office. Like how was that like for you, and what were you seeing with the clients?
So let's see. Huge. I want to say four things. First of all, we live in a country that is built on immigrants, right? Like
Yes.
way back. And I won't go into detail with any of this, but I think this is important to understand. And this is where what gets me, right? Two is that um, the the amount of sacrifices, like individuals who leave their country, the idea that it's, oh yeah, just to have a better life, almost like, yeah, I want a vacation in Hawaii, easy. No, no, no. Like they are forced to flee their country. They don't want to leave their country. They don't want to leave their kids. Like the amount of mothers I've served, like ultimate sacrifice, that are leaving their kids behind because they had no other choice, to risk their lives. So that's the other thing. Most, not all of them, that another misconception, not everyone is crossing the border, right? But for many who are literally facing life threatening circumstances with the hope of being able to get here, because that's how bad it was worth them risking their life to
Right.
try to get to better, because that's how many or how grave the consequences were, in their home country. So that's what I want people to like understand, right? Like they were forced to, it's not that they wanted to.
Right.
Second, our country does a poor job of holding themselves accountable for, the poverty or circumstances they've created in other countries that force these
Mhm.
individuals to come here. And I'm still trying to learn a lot more about that. And
Yeah.
but we know that for a fact that some of the circumstances or these countries, what they're facing, it's actually, the US that has created some of that, but no accountability, right?
Right.
Then they want to get mad that they're here and we don't have enough resources. No, there are always enough resources, especially when you have immigrants, um, especially if they're undocumented. They are paying taxes, they are contributing.
Right.
Um, and for many, it's funds that they will not be able to access for themselves. So there's also something to be said about how they are actually sustaining our Social Security
Yes.
benefits and other benefits. Again, I won't, that's a whole nother topic,
Yes.
right? But that's why I'm like, hello, we need to service these people. So not only, like we're benefiting off of them, but then like stomping on them.
Mm,
And um, we're essentially not providing the services that they need, right? So as
right.
a social worker, um, it's, I don't know, heartbreaking. But one of the things that like shifted for me, um, yes, there's a ton of mental health providers, but the difference with social work is that there is this commitment to, human rights,
Right.
social justice, um, and that micro, meso, I said micro and macro level work, right? So
Right.
I remember that morning when Trump came into office, something shifted in me that made me feel like, am I not doing enough as a social worker? Like, and it was from a place of, I understand, I love what I do and I feel called to do what I do as a clinical social worker and providing, but it felt like that was only a band-aid if for me, if I wasn't involved in policy change, activism, and trying to educate our community
Right.
about injustices that go under the radar, like um, having to tell someone, hey, you need a surgery, but that's not going to happen. No one's going to perform a surgery on you unless you show up to the ER and you're about to die. Like,
Yeah.
and just because of their status, right?
Mhm.
Um, so I don't know, so many things, right? So I think for me, that's what happens. And then sitting in front of these adolescents and these children and feeling like my fear was just as much as theirs. Like I was starting to feel just as hopeless as they were. Or, we're there to listen and to come alongside them, right? And learn from them.
Right.
But some of these things, it was like, hell no, like we need to change something here. Like, oh, these families shouldn't be going through this. It makes
No,
no sense.
absolutely.
So that's where going into private practice opened up the door where I could be just a tad bit more involved or involved in a different way.
Mm.
So I'm helping case by case by providing these immigration evaluations, but really being self employed, it meant that I made room for working with a grassroots organization and being a part as an activist of Safe Communities Coalition. They're based out of Delaware, under Network Delaware. And so we were doing a lot of work around immigrant rights, whether it was rallies. And um, I think a lot of people think federally, all the shots are called for immigration rights, but the truth is that locally and statewide, um, things can be put into place to create, safer communities or be more responsive. And I always say, if we're going to be responsive, we also have to be trauma responsive, just because that's what shows up with everything that happens.
Right.
So all that to say, I also then I end up all over the place. I'm very passionate. So I teach as an adjunct instructor for Esperanza College, which is out of Eastern University, which is in Pennsylvania. Esperanza College is out of Philadelphia, and it serves a lot of Latinx, um, or honestly immigrants, but it's in a Latinx community. And obviously they have their programs where it's like English literacy, and then they support their continued academic journey. So I was serving social work students, and it was just a privilege, right? Representation matters, to be
No,
able to
absolutely.
stand there as a Latina and serve as their professor, and even seeing, what they were coming from. And in that role, it's just fulfilling. I want to build up the social workers that are coming along. Um, but that's on the end of how do we make sure that everyone is living out their purpose, and that more and more people are aware of a lot of things that are happening, and that we need more decision makers
Oh
that
yeah,
are
absolutely.
that have that cultural humility and compassion, because we are the ones that are going to inform what other things come into place. So even though we've had a broken immigration system and some straight out terrible things that happen, um, the truth is that it did worsen during that last administration. And now we're fighting that. And honestly, I don't know that we're doing much better. But I try to educate myself. I try to join different webinars
Mm.
um, where they're talking about specifically how these laws are impacting the families that we serve.
Right.
Um, so, with that being said, kind of just that point of no one, we are the ones that are providing the direct service, and we need to use our voice to then say, this is what it really looks like when these services are denied, or when these oppressive practices continue to be a part of our culture in the US.
Yeah, I try to do that too. Like I'll have like, you know, I'm a type of person that, despite everything that's happened in our political where we at currently, like it's okay to agree to disagree, and we need to get back to that as a society, as a whole. I think in the world as a whole, to get back to that. So I'll have online conversations with people I see, like, and they're like, their wording is not correct. Like, I still see like illegal aliens, things of that nature. It's like undocumented. It's like say that, even that I just write that, like, you mean
Yeah,
undocumented. Or like recently, like in New York City, that did this program for giving out like free syringes, from harm reduction, and
yeah,
people were like against that. I'm like, you're killing two birds with one stone. Was you helping with harm reduction from using substances, and also you're helping reducing, people getting infected with HIV and AIDS. So you,
yeah,
like, don't don't say anything, like, if you're not educated, and use the social work, aspect of the work, regarding that. So I have those type of like conversations like that, and conversations that need to be had in our profession is, we because everything's like, where's your progress notes at, or the numbers are good for the month, or like in nonprofit work. uh we the lack of worst case scenarios for our clients is not nearly talked about enough. Like, what does a worst case scenario look like, for you? And when things happen, like, we're still going through a pandemic, people pass away. We have like nobody with living wills, nobody, people not having advanced directives. Like,
yeah,
what happens when you die? Like, okay, you had like, or you might have some money left over. Okay, you have no will, no trust or anything. Like, okay, what's gonna happen? Like, what you're doing with the body? Are you cremating? We having a service? Like, what does the service look like? What did the person want? Like, we're not talking about worst case scenarios for our clients, and our program directors and supervisors, and administrators don't, talk about that with us, like the workers. So, like, you really, that really, like, hit home, like, no, with me, like, yeah,
yeah,
we really don't talk about what does a worst case scenario look like for families.
yeah. I think the most important thing with everything you said, right, is kind of making sure that we are framing it and saying it like it is, like, and not sugarcoating anything. Um, so if we speak of the reality and what's really at stake, then that is talking about what are the biggest risk factors, what are the worst case scenarios, or what are all of the things that whoever we serve is dealing with that maybe isn't talked about. But also, what are we dealing with as providers
Mm,
that many aren't talking about? And so I think um, we just try to move the dial little by little. And that might be with one client we're serving as we seek out, as we do more advocacy on their hand or seek out more resources. But same for us, how we're advocating for what we need as providers to be able to do the work we know we want to do. Um, how we're pushing sometimes our supervisors, or how do we make sure we're getting into leadership roles, um, where then we have more decision making power and we're sitting at the table, to really be able to speak on behalf of whether it's personal experiences, but also as a professional, and just we have a different lens in which we're seeing things.
right.
um, and you also made me think about, like, obviously with this pandemic, um, I don't know, it was like jarring for me. Like when people would complain about not seeing family members, um, like that they couldn't see their family members,
Right.
when we were in quarantine and isolation and when everything shut down. And part of me just kept thinking, we're complaining. More than likely it's temporary. It has lasted a little longer than I thought, but still, more than likely it's temporary. And then I was thinking about the people that I serve that leave their home country and they're not able to see their mom or dad.
Mm,
20 plus years, 30 plus years, maybe not even ever. Their family member may pass away, they may never see them. So
right,
I was always constantly, because of the stories I get,
right.
I was doing all this comparing, which makes me, grounds me, because, like, man, it's humbling, right? Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
again, there's these, like, I don't know, privileges I have, right? Um, but it just, that empathy grew because we were able to experience it in a different way. That's just one example. And then to think of, so I went completely to telehealth, right? I was able to do the work I needed to do. Yes, I went through all the stress of doing virtual learning with my kids while I was trying to work.
Mhm.
I was trying to make sure I was involved with relief efforts for immigrants and making sure that they were getting the support they needed. Um, and what we saw was, right, and I'll speak to Delaware specifically because that's where we did most of the relief work. We had immigrants in these chicken plants downstate that didn't have the safety they needed to do the work,
Mm,
right? So they were showing up to work. Who knows where their kids were? So then that ups the risk factors, right?
right,
They were leaving their kids with whoever they needed to, or home alone to try and do virtual learning or not, or who knows what. They're showing up at work, bringing, you know, obviously the virus was still spreading. They were
right.
working without um, the safety precautions that were needed. They were told to show up to work sick.
Mm,
So there is a lot out there about, there's even a report about immigrants as essential workers, because between healthcare, produce, agriculture, like all these things that they were a part of that allowed us to continue to move forward, but yet they continue to be disadvantaged.
right.
Um, and so we see those effects, and we're going to deal with that, right? Like, what has the educational impact been in all of that? Um, and
I'm seeing the very beginnings of that, and we got like I've seen second graders who still can't sign out, vowel sounds and identify, letters or sight words. So it's we're 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 seeing the beginnings of it, and it's going to be a long lasting impacts on the educational system, and
yeah.
teachers retiring, people are beyond stressed.
Hmm. So the other thing I'll say is, right, we are seeing things that are like unprecedented. We don't, and we've seen this for our most vulnerable populations, right? I think we always have to think creatively. So what I want to
Mhm.
shout to social workers is, think creatively, do things different. Don't always go by the book. So yes, there's evidence-based models, but those evidence-based models aren't always based on studies that were representative of
Of
the
us.
communities that we're serving. And so that means we have to constantly be thinking about, one, more research, right? More, but how does that service delivery become more responsive? And how do we push on some things? Like, for one of the protocols for that behavioral therapy, I remember they'd be like, oh yeah, just 5 minute check-in about, whatever. It was like a specific
Hmm.
protocol that we would follow. And I'm like, no, 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 that's not going to work for my immigrant mom who was scared to bring the 3-year-old to the appointment because that was during the time where there were raids and they
Mm,
were being caught outside of like grocery stores, health centers. So they were afraid to come out at that point. So, no, I needed my 15 minutes to support that mom so that she can then follow this like treatment protocol to try to help her child's behavior.
right.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so I think we constantly have to like push little by little and in different ways, um, to serve in a wildly different way for a wildly different presentation of cases.
Right. You just provided some insight, for me, and I'm glad you brought up Delaware. I think that this is why, like, I was so excited to have you because, working in the school system, like this time last year, and really struggling, working with immigrant families, many of them from Guatemala, and a couple of people from Colombia, still coming, migrating into this country.
Yeah.
Me helping them to register their kids for school,
Hmm.
kids, just starting learning the English language. I'm gonna say it. Most of the people that live in my community or Caucasian or white. So
Yeah.
there's a certain section area of where the immigrants reside, and me having to do home visits because they couldn't read and write in Spanish. So in the mid pandemics, doing home visits, letting the parents know what is going on in the school, what the district is doing to help their kids, and try to help them with their technology, and doing basic like Zoom trainings on the spot, like to how to get on Zoom so that they could like log on to do their classes virtually, and doing all that. And two, when you're talking about downstate and Delaware, downstate Delaware really got hit hard. Um, with that, everybody got hit hard, but on downstate Delaware, New Orleans really got hit hard, and it kind of made sense that you brought up, the immigrant workers having to go in during the pandemic, that they were pretty much forced, they had to go in to work, and I definitely seen a new generation of, well, of quote unquote latchkey kids. Basically they home alone because their parents had to work, so we got these 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 year olds like learning to be responsible to hop on a Zoom to do their work at 8, 9 o'clock. And
Yeah.
that wasn't happening.
Hmm. Yeah, there's something to say also, right? Some of the challenges we do see the parentification of immigrant children, whether it's because they come, they learn the language, then they're interpreting for their parents. Like,
Mm.
I'll never forget a little kid telling his dad he had cancer. He was interpreting for the
Oh
medical
my
provider.
God.
He was only 8, you know. So we see all of these things. The pandemic certainly presented like in a different way, but a lot of things have been there. So,
Hmm.
like I said, for our underserved communities, obviously the disparities and that impact, we see it like, and it's crisis mode, like, um so yes, having to go to work, but we know, many immigrant parents that are working overnights and working 1 or 2 jobs, and then they aren't able to be available to their children. So we can go on, right? Like, of I always say that um our immigrant communities, they face some of the same life challenges that all of us do, right? But
Right.
then that's on top of everything else, or the way that plays out. Then they're going without some of the protective factors that perhaps someone else does have. And then the oppressive practices that continue to leave them at a disadvantage. So that's kind of the point that I always try to make. Um, and the risk factors, right? Like, we always want to make sure protective factors outweigh the risk factors.
Right.
And
Of
what
course.
we're seeing is that there's way too many risk factors. Um, and so the mental health of these families is where I want to see more advocacy, because I think we're ignoring it. It's like, oh, yeah, they're fine. Um, and that there's also a difference between someone who just arrived 1 or 2 years ago, and a difference between,
They
um,
just they just showing up like
yeah,
last week.
yeah, well, there's obviously a difference between your first
Yeah.
generation, second generation, and
Hmm.
third generation. Like, I
Yeah.
think there was recently, I just read a shooting in a like Spanish restaurant or something, and 2 passed away, but one, I think, had like his whole family in the area, and then the other was here on his own.
Mhm.
And I'm sure that has to do with just, um, who came in first type of thing, and how long
Right.
they've
Right.
been here. But that means the support services look a little different. um so yeah.
We could touch on this topic like pretty much like all day, but I want to
Yeah.
ask you this one last question. How do you uh do this work while still ba- uh, maybe balancing is not the right word, but like your mom, like how do you balance like doing this work while you still, like you touched on earlier, like you still had to like make sure your kids getting on Zoom doing their work, and what, and then switched over to telehealth work itself. Like how do you do this work and still like be there for your kids, being a mom first and foremost before anything else? Like how, like what does that look like for you?
So for the Lisi, it's interesting. I always say that like even though these are like there's obviously vicarious trauma and
Mm,
um but I kind of merge the personal and the professional in a way where I think that whatever suffering, and I think compared to the people I serve, maybe very little, but that I am constantly evolving, learning, and like my own growth mindset, right? That whatever I'm learning in my personal life, it's like coming up with like, how does that then intertwine with my service delivery and how I show up? But like, how do I use it as a stepping stone, essentially? So, um, on that empathy or hearing these stories and my spirit is fed. I'm hearing of the worst, but then guess what I'm seeing in the middle of that? The strength
mm,
of like human beings and just the utter. So I always say I never lose hope, and that's what keeps me grounded. So I'm always able to see like that silver lining.
right.
Um, and so as I'm listening and taking that all in, and even sometimes getting fired up and angry that this shouldn't be happening, they are also then feeding my spirit in that we are stronger. We, all of us, right?
Yeah.
Then we are just so resilient naturally. And so it kind of just takes us taking that into account. So that's my opportunity. There's something called post traumatic growth. And so I try to make sure that's incorporated in everything that I do instead of just saying, you're traumatized, you'll always be traumatized. Like, and it is what it is. No, so like I always have that like hope and deep respect for human suffering too. So like it all holds weight. It's almost like I'm honored to
Mm,
serve. And because I consider it a calling, like my identity is heavily based on like that service
yeah.
oriented work, I think that's what keeps me going. Like I want to do this. I want to help. I know I'm learning from them. I'm giving them an opportunity. And so it feels like I'm helping, even if I can't change. A lot of
Yeah.
them for the first time, they're telling their story, right? That's the
Mm,
cool thing about the evaluation, that they're telling their story from birth essentially to present moment. And so it's that's my honor, right? And then I have to find a way to tell their story, but they're the heart of the matter and they're sharing their heart with me. So I really value that. I'm really grateful for that opportunity. um and I try to give myself the space to process whatever is happening, but I do some clinical supervision, and I always tell people that we can't act like our personal life, our personal experiences are on one side and our professional life is here. No, the work we're doing is human. Like it's not, I don't know how to describe it. um we're changing lives essentially,
right.
but our life is constantly changing. So I think we always have to be asking ourselves, what does that mean? How can
Mm,
I do better? How can I think creatively? And when we have a nudge, when something's offset, sometimes it's not even burnout. Sometimes it's just we're working somewhere or doing the work that like is not for us at that
yeah.
point in time. So it's kind of not being afraid, because we can easily burn out or easily give too much. But if we don't have the support in place because our team is terrible or whatever it is, it's like giving ourselves permission to honor who we are deeply so that we can be fully present in whatever work we're doing. So, like, I've always enjoyed all of the different roles I've been in, but as life demands have changed, I've also then asked, how do I do the work and have the impact I want to have? Um, and then still live out whatever I know I need for myself. Um, so I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. Ho- and
One
your
last
work.
thing I'll say,
Uh-huh.
connection is everything. Connection is everything. We need to make sure we have our protective supports in place.
Oh
And so if
yeah,
we're not
absolutely.
getting it at work, link up with the social work, the other colleagues, whether social workers or not, but the other colleagues that will support you through that. Um, and yeah, just networking, but in a natural, organic way. Keep talking about the work you're doing, keep talking about the needs you're seeing, and you start to learn about different approaches, and like it becomes your advocacy, or just creatively thinking about how we can continue progressing.
Hey, you definitely have an ally with me, and I'm glad we're able to. I'm so glad, so grateful for that conference. That like I need I need her on the podcast somehow, some way. Like we need to connect and talk and just continue because your work is so needed. I'm like, and just the brief 6 months I was at my previous job, and it's like, and then finding out, this whole school year is like they're being completely neglected. Like the school, the district is completely neglecting them completely. Like how are their needs
Yeah,
being met? So your work in PA, I have a friend of mine who's like the PA is so like racist, at least from her experience. And here in Delaware, there's so many immigrants here, not just Wilmington, but here like
yeah.
Middletown, Newark,
Hmm.
Dover. There's a huge. I'm learning there's like a huge population like further south in Dover, and then even further south, below that. So Delaware as a whole, needs your service, and you're out there doing the work, and so appreciative of the work that you're doing, and I thank you for that.
Yeah, and likewise, like I admire the work you're doing, and I love that you're taking your social work role, um, and bringing us together with the podcast, right? And talking about all of the different ways that social workers can serve. Um, and then lastly, talking about neglect. You mentioned it, right? Like we're neglectful if we're not connecting with one another. And in PA, even the county that is the richest, there are pockets of immigrants that are living in poverty within there. So we're the fastest growing population. And so I can go on and on, right, about
Yeah.
how we need to be responsive there, but any underserved
Hmm.
community. Um, I think that's the beauty of social work.
Yeah, absolutely. How can people find you?
So I don't know if you share like the information on your
Yeah, I
podcast,
do. Yeah.
but I'm easily accessible. We're a small team. So I'll share like my email. It's just djwashington.lcsw@gmail.com. I'm not much in the social media world, but then our website is www.thecompassionagents.com, thecompassionagents.com. So yeah, and I love connecting with others, so I'm open to any sort of questions.
Awesome. Dalisi, muchas gracias.
Gracias a ti, and thank you for the opportunity to connect to others. Cuídate.
Uh,
Bye bye.
Cuídate. Bye.